recording this session and will be made available along with the notes and additional resources on our ERA Coalition blog. Also, if you're having sound issues watching through Eventbrite, you should be able to click through to Zoom to watch there. We're also live streaming on our Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok channels. If you need closed captioning, you can select that option from the Zoom screen as well. Now, let's get started. Our first panelist is Kate Gormley. Kate is a vice president at Lake Research Partners, where she conducts quantitative and qualitative research on behalf of foundations, nonprofits, and issue advocacy groups. Kate's research portfolio includes a variety of progressive issues: reproductive health and freedom, women's leadership and equality, workplace policies, gender-based violence, health, and more. Kate is a native Houstonian and a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin. She is the proud mother of two spirited young girls. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we are joined by Amanda Brown-Learman, the executive director at the Supermajority and Supermajority Education Fund, which builds women's political power through informing, training, and organizing women across age, race, and background. As executive director, Amanda is one of the youngest women and very few women of color to lead a progressive multiracial women's organization. Before her time with the Supermajority and Supermajority Education Fund, Amanda was the Democratic National Committee's political and organizing director during the 2018 midterms and is a former national political director for Rock the Vote. Under her leadership, Supermajority and Supermajority Education Fund continue to build a multiracial community that centers women of color and works to create a supermajority voting bloc of progressive women. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And our final guest and ERA superstar, Jerry Burton, is a lifelong progressive activist. She is currently co-executive director of the Nevada chapter of the NOW, or National Organization of Women, or NOW. Jerry previously served on NOW's national board, representing the Western region, and was chair of NOW's ERA committee, traveling from Arizona to Virginia to support their campaigns to ratify the federal ERA. Most recently, she took the lead on campaigning to pass a ballot initiative in Nevada to add an expanded ERA to the Nevada state constitution, the most inclusive ERA in the nation. Welcome, Jerry, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Zakia.
So to give a little background, where we are on the other side of the midterm elections, which political pundits thought would not be kind to us or our issues, from ERA, access to abortion care, voting rights, healthcare, environmental justice, to inflation and the economy. But their predictions did not materialize. We can celebrate that voters came out and voted for equality. The ERA ballot initiative in Nevada won with nearly 60% of the vote. Young voters, those under age 29, were major influencers in several key battleground states. Many are calling this election the most diverse election ever. Kate, I'll turn to you first. Before we turn totally to election results, you polled the Feminist Majority Foundation, Ms. Magazine, for the Feminist Foundation and Ms. Magazine prior to the elections with voters in key battleground states prior to the elections. What did you learn from women voters, especially young women of color, about the important issues driving them to vote? And what about men voters in these polls? Were there more important issues, or their important issues the same as women and men, or was there any difference based by race, ethnicity, gender, the like?
Okay, thank you. That's a lot of questions. And we actually fielded 2 polls. So I have 2 polls to talk about and 3 questions to answer. So bear with me. I'll get you the answers to everything. So first, as you said, these were both conducted in battleground states on behalf of the Feminist Majority Foundation and Ms. Magazine. The states were Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Ohio, Georgia, Florida, and Wisconsin. So those were the battlegrounds. And then we were in the field in the beginning of September, mid-September. So that's the time period and where we were. So first, I'm going to talk about a poll we did with registered voters of all ages, and I will also talk about the other poll we did with voters ages 18 to 29. So among the electorate overall, we found that inflation and rising prices mattered to voters' decisions, but it was actually abortion and women's rights that were just as critical among women voters. So same thing happened in the poll among young voters as well. And when we looked at that survey, these were the exact same battleground states I outlined, and everyone was aged 18 to 29 registered voters. And what we saw there was if it was a Black woman taking the poll, a Latina woman, or a white woman, abortion and women's rights were the most important issues in determining their vote. I will say among Latina women, inflation and rising prices was tied as the top issue to abortion and women's rights. So how did men behave? Did they behave the same way? And they did not. We really saw in both of these surveys that abortion and women's rights were more important to women than to men. So again, if we look at the likely voters overall, of all ages, men prioritized inflation as a voting issue in higher numbers than women. So we had 44% among men said that was a top issue compared to 32% among women. Women were twice as likely than men to identify women's rights and or abortion as one of their top issues. So for men, it was 17%. And so for women, it was 31%. So inflation and rising prices, 32% for women, abortion and women's rights, 31% for women. For men, the numbers were 44 and 17. So big differences there between men and women. Let's see. The same thing goes on when we're looking just at the younger men. Again, inflation and rising prices was the top issue for the younger men, and half as many younger men said that abortion and women's rights was the top issue. And again, abortion and women's rights were the most important issues for young women voters. And then the last question you had is, were there any differences across the races and ethnicities? And again, the answer there is yes. So this is not a situation where men and women are on the same page, and it's not a situation where Black voters, Latinx voters, and white voters are on the same page either. So the top issues for Black voters, really unique issue agenda here: inflation, rising prices, women's rights and abortion. Those are tied for the top two. Then we have gun violence and racism. And that is what sets Black voters apart from voters of other races and ethnicities. The top issue for Latinx voters was inflation and rising prices. Then when we add women's rights and abortion together, that's in their second tier, along with immigration and threats to democracy. And then when we look at just the white voters, their top issues are inflation and rising prices, threats to democracy, and then we have women's rights and abortion coming in together. So like I said, really big differences if you're a woman or a man, and then really big differences across race as well on the issues that voters were prioritizing when they were deciding for whom they were going to vote.
So I know you also have exit poll data. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but Amanda, I want to switch to you. In this election, we had the good fortune of having a number of groups managing GOTV campaigns, and supermajority was one of the larger efforts. Can you tell us about supermajority and describe the Women Are Voting campaign you ran during the 2020 midterm elections? You're on the ground in many battleground states. What do you think made the difference in those states? And why do you think the pundits got it so wrong?
Yeah, man, loaded question. Like, how honest should we be?
Very.
Supermajority ran a campaign called Women Are Voting, largely because we knew that we needed to create, we wanted it to be a rally cry and give women in particular a place to channel their rage, their anger, the hopes even that they were holding coming out of the Dobbs decision. And so we did a little bit with the Women Are Voting campaign back in 2020. So we knew we were going to bring it back this year, but we ended up bringing it back just behind the leaked decision ahead of the actual Supreme Court decision in the Dobbs case, again, because we knew that this moment was coming and that we needed to channel the many emotions, valid emotions that women would be feeling into a constructive way to push back, to organize, and to make sure that our voices are heard. And supermajority is completely oriented around voting and making sure that we're building a multiracial community of women who are going to the polls and bringing their friends with them. And so, I have a fair amount of experience, Zakia, having done my time as an organizer in the party. So I was like, what is the win margin in these critical battleground states? And how can we make sure that we are contacting these women to make sure that they get every reminder that they need to vote? And so we worked specifically in Michigan and Pennsylvania. We had our largest footprints there, and knew that we wanted to also do work in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina as well. And we literally looked at how much we won or lost in those states in 2020 to then just figure out what our turnout goal needed to be. And we did the math backwards to then say, okay, if we need 20,000 women to turn out in Michigan, then we need to contact 300,000 women in Michigan, and we need to contact them 5 to 8 times so that they get a reminder from someone that they trust. We believe wholeheartedly in women talking to other women, and built a whole program around that. And we were thrilled to work with so many incredible partners. Also just taking an appreciation for the women's ecosystem and so many of us that have been doing this work for so long, wanting to get to a sum that was greater than all of us even. And through that coalition, we had 58 million, and we're counting, contacts to a very targeted universe of women voters. So again, honed in on the type of women, largely young women, a lot of young women of color, a lot of first-time voters, a lot of women who don't traditionally vote in midterms, to make sure that they got those reminders and they had no excuse not to vote, that they had motivation, they had the information, and in many cases, we were like sending them with their friends to the polls. And that was the work that we did. And I think it was really important, and something that I think, the pundits got wrong is actually the thing that generally, I think they just underestimated the emotions of women this cycle. And again, everything on the spectrum from rage, fear, hope. But I want to hone in on that last word, hope, because I think that is like women's greatest superpower. It's the thing that, like, despite all of the challenges that women face, all of the things that keep us up every single night, like holding hope is what gets you to tomorrow. It's what gets you out of bed. It's how you talk to your children. And it's that ability to hold hope that also connects women across so many different lived experiences. And that is something that I think was completely missed in this election cycle. But this idea that women could come together and fight together, organize together, vote together for the world that we want, and not just, sit in this like status quo or accept where we are, or even just be mad about where we are, but like holding hope and doing the work to get to that better vision. And I think with abortion in particular, and, Kate was talking about this, abortion went from being a very polarizing issue to the question this election cycle being, how mobilizing will it be? And I would go so far as to say that it's actually a coalition building issue. And I don't think people got that until now, which is great that they're finally getting it. But
well, with your help, though, I mean, that's really what it boils down to, is having organizations that see the infighting that goes on with so many different movements as like such a deterrent to our success and such a detrimental occasion. So yes, coming together and doing all the things. And also, you all did the work on the ground to get people there. So thank you for making this election much more positive than it otherwise would be, because we know that the places where Republicans won big is because they've gerrymandered their seats. And then the places where we still have hope are the places where we're going to continue to grow and expand on our gains so far.
Totally.
Jerry, let me pull you.
Really good to say I told you so.
That never hurts, does it?
Right.
And we'll talk more about, Kate, about the polling and some of the things that you saw and why we think that translated. But Jerry, let me bring you into the conversation. So the ERA won on a ballot initiative in Nevada. So congratulations so much for your hard work there. So you amended the state's constitution to prohibit the infringement of rights based on race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. And nearly 6 out of 10 voters favored the amendment. Let's just put that in perspective. That's 58.6%, which in any other election, you haven't seen those kinds of numbers of people showing up and standing up for their rights. So Jerry, you got it right. What was the winning strategy for you in Nevada that led to such a clear-cut victory for the ERA?
Well, thanks. We're very proud, and we're proud of that language in our ERA. And first of all, you have to have a wonderful team of volunteers. Our Nevada Now chapter is all volunteer. They were all in. A lot of them are listening in right now, so got to give them that because we worked hard. And we also were volunteers and advocated for the 2 times in the legislative session to get it on the ballot with Senator Spearman and Nicole Canizaro. So they were really obviously important to get that inclusive language. But we also worked really hard to get a coalition of groups. And then when you were talking about coalition building, this was a way for us to get in Nevada, Generation Ratify was involved, Planned Parenthood, NARAL, SEIU, Culinary Union. We had LGBTQ groups involved, a lot of our progressive groups, and the National Action Network. I mean, we had a broad scope of people that were helping us. We also had Katie Hornung from Vote Equality send Kate Kelly to live in Nevada for 2 months, actually live in my house with me. We were and we wrapped our truck in ERA art. So if you get a chance, check out our social media. We drove that around and had an amazing swag and just made it fun. Made the ERA have a presence in like every campaign event in Nevada. We would show up at the governor's thing and he would, like, we're calling us the ERA ladies and joking about, saving gas and driving together. So my co-executive director just told me we held 34 and attended 34 different events around Nevada. We were in parades and rallies. Elizabeth Warren came and we had an event with SEIU. She signed the truck and I saved that. We took off the wrap. But because ours was so exclusive, we got out in the community and we talked to people at a horse parade, with a Latina event. We were in the Las Vegas Pride Parade in the festival, Asian night market. So it's just kind of making a list of all the things we had done. And I think that coalition building made a difference because it's such an inclusive ERA, like we could get everyone involved with it.
That's amazing. So on the ground leading up to in the days, and this is for both Amanda and Jerry, on the ground leading up to the days to election day, what did you see? Or did you see indications that results will be as positive as they were? What were some of the signs you were looking for?
Do you want me to go first?
Either way, yes, go for it.
Well, I think we had a different experience than a lot of people did around the country. People kept telling us that it was going to pass. It was polling well, and it did before we started the campaign. And we were like, how can that, we didn't want to take it for granted because all the other races, the governor obviously didn't win. It was very close. Senator Cortez Masto won by a little bit. We were working with all these different people that had close races, but ours was just going to easily slide through. So but we did have a lot of events and heard a lot of positive. We had very little opposition, and at least that came out and wrote op-eds and that sort of thing. And when they did, they talked about abortion and trans rights because ours, and we would say we agree with these people. It will support help with abortion rights in Nevada and with trans rights. So I think we had the opposite. We had everybody telling us how it was going to pass, and it did, but we didn't stop that. We didn't stop our work. We were working hard on it. So,
great.
But I think Amanda had a different experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the on the ground was a very different energy than the pundits or what we were hearing about on MSNBC or even in just like conversations with donors. Like I think there was a lot of despair and sort of resignation about this election cycle that it felt like you were I think many of us were constantly trying to be like, no, like I'm literally coming from a volunteer phone bank where people are asking me to make more phone calls. It's like they're doing the work. They're here. We're going to do it. And I think the signs actually go back, pretty far this cycle to just early like registration. Obviously early vote was such a good indication of what would happen on election day. And the early vote numbers from this cycle are phenomenal with women also, like the gender gap, even in early vote numbers is shocking in some of the battleground states. but you saw that trend start even with voter registration. There's some incredible stats around how voter registration picked up in Kansas immediately following the Dobbs decision, and that also, happened across party lines to vote for that amendment. And so, yes, you saw that sort of energy building. I think the other even example I would point to was in Michigan with getting the ballot initiative for Proposition 3 onto the ballot. I remember early organizing conversations where people were scared to death about getting 400,000 signatures, and then they collected over 700,000 signatures, so that was another just, I think, really helpful moment that definitely was an inclination for where we're going. And then I would say the only other sort of indicator that I think is always a good one, but is volunteers. And women do all the work every election cycle. Let's be clear about who are the volunteers on campaigns. But they were so fired up this cycle at a time when even myself, I'm like, I'm tired, and the pandemic has broken so many women, or has given us reason to be broken, I should say. And it's like pandemic, and then you get hit in the face with, oh my God, we no longer have a right that we've had for generations, that people have fought for, that was codified in in our Constitution, and now that's being challenged, and sort of the biggest slap in the gut, and yet women were showing up to volunteer. And I think for a lot of organizations, certainly Supermajority saw it, but in talking to so many of my counterparts, other folks in the Women Are Voting Coalition, folks at the ERA, women were showing up this cycle and demanding more. I feel like we used to, on some of our text banks, they would go through texting 200,000 people in 20 minutes and then be like, okay, where's the next list? And I'm like, I don't have another list. Those are the people. And yeah, there's just a real hunger and a lot of energy on that sort of volunteer engagement is what also always sustained my hope, even in the dark times of this cycle.
Yeah, there's so many anecdotes out there of moms just doing what they need to do, what they have to do to get their candidates elected, because no one else is going to do it if we don't, right?
Totally. No, totally. And that's always been the case. That's actually one of the things that I'm personally on a mission to change, is just we have to build women's political power. And part of doing that work is getting recognition for the what we are already doing, mm-hmm. And one of the things, one of the headlines that should be a headline is the fact that women were the majority of voters. Point blank,
Hard stop. Yes.
Yeah, it's period, full stop. That is the sentence. That is the point. And so, our elected leaders need to be working to serve women, period, full stop. And I think part of our work, part of our charge is making sure that we get the respect that women voters deserve. I want respect. I also, in some moments, I'm I want politicians also to fear a whole lot of women voting, but I'll start with respect.
I think a lot of our coalition members would agree with you on the fear part of things. We're not there yet, but we're working on it.
Right.
The work that we're doing with these elections is helping to position us in places where they can't take us for granted, as they always do. Kate, I'd like to go to you real quickly to just talk a little bit about what we learned from the exit polls and showing why voters perform so much different than what some expected, but more along the lines of what Amanda was saying, people showing up in places where they usually do but aren't getting the recognition for. So can you tell us somewhat about the difference between the election polls and what the polling showed prior to the election?
Sure. So some really quick election poll cautions. They're really great for providing insight into how core issues and dynamics shaped voters' decisions. Comparing like 2022 to 2018 helps us understand some demographic changes, but they are not as accurate in demographic turnout, especially for voters who are Black, Latinx, AAPI, and Indigenous. And then there are other data sources that are going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks and months that are going to be more accurate and tell a different story than the information that we have now. So caveat, exit polls are a really useful tool, but they do have limitations, just like any other poll does.
Very quickly, for those
Yeah.
on the call who don't know why that is, can you just give us like the 30-second overview of why the exit polling isn't correct always, so that people can get a better sense of why that is?
Sure. And so much respect to the people who do this. Like, it is hard work and valued work, and we are grateful for it. But, you know, they do exit polls by contacting people actually as they're leaving voting sites. And then they have other ways of reaching voters as well. But it's, you know, we're going to talk to so many people who come out. And because they're collected like in person, it's also relies a little bit on the interviewer perception of who it is that they're talking to. So it's not like representative, it's kind of more randomized. So it's not like, if this is what the polling site looks at where we're doing the exit poll, we're going to make sure if 53% of the people voting there are women, that we have 53% of the people taking the poll who are women. It's just not precise in that exact way. Okay.
Thank you.
So how are things different? Well, I will say, I don't work on candidate campaigns, so I'm less involved with like the horse race side of things. It is incredibly hard to predict the future, and that is what an election poll is doing. It's saying, who do we think is going to turn out and show up and do this behavior on this day or in this period of time that voting is open for folks, and then how are they going to vote? So that is always difficult to get right. And we have seen in the past couple of election cycles some hits and some misses there, right? I think that's a very generous way of describing what we've seen. So I was really looking at the attitudes of what was going on. And my big question this year was, would voter support for these issues that we've been talking about translate into how they voted for candidates? And yes, in some places we saw absolutely they did, but in other places, not so much. They were bringing other things into bear. I also was really curious, you know, is Gen Z going to turn out? As Amanda mentioned, there was huge voter registration after the leak decision, and running up to the vote specifically in Kansas of new voters. So what did that mean? We knew that they were women. We knew that they were younger based on modeling that folks were doing, but were they going to show up and turn out on election day? And as I mentioned, we're going to have a clearer picture of turnout as we get data from other sources in the coming time. I was also looking at how is abortion going to play out in California, Michigan, Vermont, and Kentucky and Montana. I've done a lot of polling in red states on abortion, and I can tell you that, you know, just because it is a state that tends to vote more Republican does not mean that that is a state where people want to restrict access to abortion. So I was thrilled to see that the voters in Kentucky and Montana delivered there. It's really about values and about personal decision making, and that is what we saw across all of these states. Another thing I was looking at is, you know, a lot of the fundamentals were not great, really pessimistic about the direction of the country, not feeling great about the president and how he was performing. And so what the exit polls have shown us so far is, despite this intensity and feeling negative about Joe Biden and the job he's doing as president, we saw there were fewer voters who were voting to oppose Biden in 2022 than there were voters to oppose Trump in 2018. So that shows us there were many Democrats that were feeling negative or pessimistic about the direction of the country, but still sticking with the party and voting Democratic.
That tells us a lot. Thank you for diving into those numbers. Amanda, Supermajority centered your organizing on the experiences of women of color. Were there successes that you want to share with us that we can build upon?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kate, I think that you just named a couple of them. The values-based approach, I think, was really powerful for communities that traditionally or like I'm not even sure what the right language is, but in a lot of polls have given people reason to believe that, or like we have oriented our messaging around, I think our messaging has just advanced this year. And I think that has a lot to do with the values conversation that we evolved to, and the challenge around understanding, understanding, that power hungry men often are trying to have more rights over women for their bodies, their lives, and their futures. And even if that is not a decision that you might make, there is a way to find empathy, and still value freedom and liberty. And I think that sort of evolution in our messaging helped us with a lot of different constituencies, certainly with along race lines, but also I think there was opportunity there across partisan lines as well. One of the communities actually that I'm fascinated in about thinking is young women who have grown up with Republican parents. And what are they thinking right now? And what is this election? What is the Dobbs decision? Who voted for the first time this year, right? What is that? What does that look like in 2 years? What does that look like in 4 years? And that's where I'm, again, go back to that coalition building moment or opportunity. But I think the other thing I would name is just supermajority fundamentally believes that organizing is all about telling stories and sharing stories. And I think that people not only became more comfortable talking about abortion and literally saying the word abortion this cycle, but you saw more people share their stories from across the spectrum as well. And I think lifting up all of those experiences allowed more people to come into conversation, again, all grounded in freedoms and liberties that people should have over their bodies. But I think that storytelling was a really fundamental, was really critical this year. And I think had brought a lot of people into the conversation, invoked a lot of empathy, and united women, again, across all of the many things that traditionally or, more regularly keep us apart, right? Like where we live, how much money we have, how we grew up, what color our skin is, how much school we had, all of those sorts of traditional divisions, if you will. I think the sort of storytelling element normalize the conversation, but also normalize the experience. And there's a lot of shared synergy. People found were able to connect again on that set of shared values and bring more people into conversation. So I think that element of storytelling, and I know I'm getting ahead of you, Zakia, but that's one thing that I think is just so fundamental and is the work that Supermajority is trying to do, is just getting more people comfortable in sharing their story, because that's every conversation matters, every story. And, the receiving end of that could be your neighbor. It could be a target voter in North Carolina. It could be a cousin who you've never agreed with, but you need to organize at Thanksgiving this year. And there's just I want every woman to feel powerful and connected and grounded in her story, because I think that's how we change hearts and minds.
Yes, sharing. It's time that we put our values out there as well. We know the other side does, and it's usually counterproductive to the work we're trying to do. So it's our time to share our values and show why it's important to get others on board. Jerry, another question for you is basically the same question. So you had a resounding victory. So what's next for Nevada and the ERA, and what are you taking away from what you learned in this campaign?
Well, we were able to keep our female majority legislature. So we're going to be working on legislation next year. We'll take a little break for the holidays and get to work on that. And we've always been involved with the federal equal rights amendment. So we've been pushing are lucky to have 2 senators in Nevada who support it and have visually done so, signed letters, made videos for us. So we'll be continuing to push in that area as well. And we've built a lot of really great coalitions. So we will be working in coalition with the people that we've been working with. We have a lot of work to do. We're excited, but we'll take a little break and get to work in January.
Great, thank you. So I have a couple of questions here, but I know we have a good number of questions in the chat. So Chrissy, we think we want to open it up to the questions in the chat, or should I go ahead with the questions we had prepared?
We have quite a few questions in the chat, so we can probably pop over there, and there might be some alignment. So we can just start with the first question, which was from Kathy Perez. Can the slim majority of Senate now vote on ERA? I feel like that could be a question for Jerry, who I know is working with us on our federal work.
I was thinking Zakia. No.
They would rather hear from you, Jerry, but go ahead.
Oh, wow. Well, I as I said, I'm happy we have our two senators in Nevada who have been involved with that. I think we know we have to work in Georgia to get another one. So we're going to be doing some phone banking into help in Georgia as well. And then we will be getting to work on the federal ERA. Zakia, what are your thoughts on that?
The short answer is yes, there is time, but we have a very small window in which to do it, which means, and Jerry, thank you so much for uplifting Georgia. We all need to be uplifting Georgia, because if we want any of our issues to advance, we need to maintain that slim majority in the Senate. And so everyone on this call, if you are not already helping out in Georgia in some capacity, whether it's your dollars, whether it's your phone calls, your text messages, your emails, whatever it is, do the work, because we have to maintain that. Georgia is a very vital state for us to maintain that. But yes, we have a short window, and I know we're going to do another week of action soon before the Senate recesses for the year, or adjourns for the year for the session. So you will be hearing more from us about how you can get involved in that campaign. But yes, the Senate needs to do its job, and it's our job to hold them accountable. Going back to Amanda's point, they can't keep taking us for granted.
And if you want to take action now, I will just add on, you can go to eracoalition.org/schedule-a-vote. And there are lots of ways to take action to contact your senators or Senate Majority Leader Schumer and ask him to schedule a vote as soon as they come back into session. Just a point of privilege there. So
yes,
our next question is from Karen Tracy. How do we more effectively communicate to everyone that women's rights, gender equality are economic issues and directly are connected to women's finances?
I can answer that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've done surveys on this, and I can tell you that voters already get it. They are already with us, that abortion, access to birth control, equal pay, access to paid family and medical leave, all of these things are tied to economic security for people. We saw that over the summer before the election. We saw it when we just did an election survey that was in the field as people were voting in the last few days before the election. So knowing that people are already with us, a key to that is repetition. We need to say it over and over again. The way our brains work, and I've been lucky enough to work with some other consultants who've explained this to me, is that the more we hear concepts, they feel more familiar, we like them more, and so we feel more affinity for them. The more our brains can wrap themselves around this idea of this concept. So that's why repetition is so important. So we do need to be repeating this message to kind of build that affinity, make people like it even more than they already do right now. That's what I would say.
And Zakia, if I could just hop on, one of the things that really resonated with people we talked to is, again, equal pay, but also their Social Security, that women retire in poverty, that you work all those years making 25% less, then that's going to affect you in your retirement. And our ERA included age, discrimination on age. And so that was something that really resonated with people.
Thank you.
Amazing. Our next question is actually just a note for Amanda. What you said about hope was so spot on and inspirational. Thank you for all the hard work you did to make this happen. So that was from Sarah Evans. Sorry, my kitten wanted to help out for a second. Next question is from Joanne Gallows, who reached the Indigenous women.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions in the chat about our sample and who we talked to. And hey, how come when you were talking earlier about women of different races, you like slid right over women who are Asian American, Pacific Islander, and women who are Indigenous? So let me quickly explain this. What we did when we did these two surveys is that we surveyed a full sample that's representative of the electorate across these battleground states. And then we oversampled an extra 100 Latinx voters and 100 Black voters. And then what we did is when we do that, we're able to look at them by subgroups because we have enough folks in the sample. So we take that extra and we add it to the people who are in the regular sample, and now we have enough people. So we did not do that consistently across every single racial and ethnic subgroup. So that means that we only have the people who are represented in the sample. And like, I get you, I want to know answers to, and I think it's important that we represent every voice. Like, I'm lucky enough that many of my clients do make those investments in a survey, but I do want to acknowledge that they're expensive. It is expensive to oversample Indigenous people. It is expensive to do an oversample of voters who are AAPI. And so sometimes, honestly, we can't do it. It doesn't mean that we didn't poll people. It just means that the survey sample doesn't have a large enough group of those people for us to be able to break them out. Again, that has nothing to do with how worthy their voices are, how important their voices are, how much they matter in community and in the survey. It's just a matter of numbers. And once we have small sample sizes, the margin of error gets really large and it stops being really reliable data. I hope that helps all of the questions about, why this, why that, who did the interviewing. The same interviewers, they're professional interviewers that we work with consistently. If it was the phone survey, it was different people calling people and talking to them live on their landlines or on their cell phones, sending them a text and getting them to complete a survey that way. The other survey with young voters was conducted online. So no one was interviewing them. They were just responding to an online survey.
Okay, thank you for that.
Great. You're welcome.
Our next question is from Dee Dee and also for Kate, I think. Are there any plans to do further polling in the future of this same nature? In the future, is there a way that we can focus on Ohio? In Ohio, efforts are underway to put reproductive rights on the ballot in 2023 or 24. This polling seems very important for Ohio. Your thoughts?
I mean, I love polling. Like, please hire me to do more polls. Nothing would make me happier, honestly. And like I mentioned, I do a lot of research on abortion and reproductive rights and access. So yes, I'm sure there are many plans if this gets on the ballot, before it gets on the ballot, as it's being put on the ballot, if they're doing messaging, there will be plans for sure to do research, public opinion research in Ohio, focus groups, surveys. Like if they're making a kind of investment that a ballot measure is going to go on the ballot, in my experience, that yes, there is public opinion research that goes along with that.
If anyone else wants to add, you're more than welcome to. Okay, our next question is from Diana, and she asks, why do you think other races were so close when this passed strongly? And she's talking about the Nevada ERA ballot question here.
Well, I know in Nevada, we haven't seen the polling yet, and I'm really interested to see how young people came out. At the beginning, they think they were going to, and apparently overwhelmingly young people around the country, but in Nevada as well. We had kind of a different situation because our governor lost, and that's unfortunate because he was very helpful to us getting our legislation through. And being in the middle of a pandemic and closing down the strip, I think economically and that was a situation there. And that's why we were worried about the ballot question, because everything was polling so close. I was at an event when Catherine Cortez Masto won, and I was getting texts from all over the country. Thank goodness, she helped hold the Senate. So I think Nevada is a purple state. And so that shows, and I haven't seen the numbers yet, but that means Republicans and Democrats voted for the state ERA. It was that we considered it a nonpartisan issue. Equality should not be Democrat or Republican. And I do believe, with the numbers that held true. But it was scary to see, everything was pretty much 50-50 on the other races. Luckily, we pulled out Secretary of State, which is really important all over the country. Cisco Aguilar won he's been a friend to the ERA. And the other thing is all of our candidates were talking about abortion and the Equal Rights Amendment at every event. And I think that was certainly different this time around. So that was just our experience on the ground.
Great, thank you. We have a question from LJ on data on turnout from seniors. I think this would be for Kate.
Okay, well, like I said, we kind of just have exit polls to go off of right now. And I mentioned like they're really good at some things and they're not so great at predicting turnout. So if you can stay tuned, there will be better information in a couple of months. So according to the network exit polls that were released, it looks like seniors, folks 65 or over, made up 28% of the electorate. And in the House ballot, voted 55% Republican and 43% Democratic.
Wow, okay, thank you. I think this next question we actually sort of answered already, Kate, so don't have to worry about that. Here's one from Margaret. Our AAUW group sent postcards to voters in Nevada reminding them to vote. Is there any evidence that this action made a difference? And that might be extrapolated to, do postcards make a difference generally? Since I know a lot of folks, you know, that's a really easy way to get involved from home while you're doing other things.
We had AAUW was involved with us from the very beginning. Even before we had the campaign, they were on the coalition calls. I think that did get voters out. We kind of on the ground, anecdotally, we found that, and I think we're seeing this in Georgia, white women, older women in Nevada. We had an event where Kate Kelly went because I couldn't go. And she ended up with a pretty conservative group of people in Las Vegas. And yeah, that we saw the opposition and they were white and old. So so it was kind of eye-opening, and an area we definitely need to work on all over the country, it sounds like to me.
Great, thank you.
I would just jump in on the tactic itself also of writing a postcard. And I think any form of contact is helpful. And, you know, we talk about door knocks, most helpful. Phone banking really matters, even though people feel like it's really hard. It's not. And you can get trained to do it. And then a lot of people write letters. Those letters matter. Postcards matter. And I think, you know, we've made it, there's a lot of really incredible partners and technology that makes it like very, very simple to do. And if you have a little bit of extra time to, you know, put your own spin on it or write your own special note also, I think, you know, you can imagine being on the receiving end of one of those notes and being like, somebody took the time to send this to me. And that is just another reminder to that person on the other end that their voice matters, their vote matters, they matter, which is exactly the sentiment that we need to be getting across to more people.
And I also want to point on the other spectrum, we had a lot of people writing postcards. I know Laura Campbell is listening in. She's on my board and went and spoke with a class at the community college here, the College of Southern Nevada, and had 25 students volunteer to help with postcard writing and phone banking in different ways. They did get credit in the class, but they also they came to parades and did all kinds of events with us. So one of the things we saw was when you went out and talked to a class, especially college, high school age, these young women and young people had not heard of the ERA. And once they do, they were enthusiastic and wanted to find ways to help. So I think that's when we look at the future going into 2024, I think that's a way that we can get our message out is actually going and talking in these different ways.
Absolutely. Kathy did say, thanks for the update. I'm making calls for Georgia tomorrow, so she's hardcore. We have a question from Carolyn. Greetings. CA Dem Women's Caucus has been working in partnership with grassroots headquarters on Masto Mondays. So how do we keep that going for 2024? This might be a Jerry question.
Amanda also took herself off mute there.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah, go ahead, Amanda. I wasn't aware. I was trying to kind of be clear on what the event was they were having.
It's Masto Mondays, which I think is probably like phone banking Mondays where they call specifically for Cortez Masto.
Oh, gotcha. So we had a regular, we called it Wednesdays with Nevada Now, and it was in person. We had it at one of our board members' house, and we would do different activities, planning what was coming up the next week, but also postcard writing, not just for the ERA, but also for candidates. And I think that really helped us all stay in touch through the campaign. And people would come, and bring their ideas on volunteer ideas and planning events and that sort of thing. So I think it's huge because you build that community, and it's nice to be on Zoom. And we were doing things in Zoom up to Reno, because if anybody's been to Nevada, it's, as Kate Kelly knows, she drove the truck up there. It is a 9 to 10 hour drive to Reno. So Zoom is, it's a long way there. And there's literally 2, population areas. So you have to get up there and campaign. But I think those in-person events are important, and on Zoom as well. I mean, we're going to do a phone bank for Georgia on Zoom just to get people trained. So that's important too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's a really great organizing tactic to routinize some of this. So if people are already in the habit of being anywhere or doing something at a specific time, just keep that going. And there's plenty of opportunities to keep them busy. We can all write letters or I think making phone calls into Georgia, maybe if you have a Southern accent, you'd be prime for that phone call. But there are ways for us to help in elections across the country right now, or to make sure that, we're winning other fights for progress. And then certainly just thinking ahead, the state legislatures, like so many of the fights that we have been fighting for so long at the national level. I mean, the ERA is like such an incredible example of this, making gains on and having these conversations also in state capitals is like just around the corner. So like Jerry said, it's important to also rest a little bit, because we should like take the W, celebrate the win, rest up, and be ready to come back to work to, keep these conversations going, keep the pressure on our elected leaders, and keep demanding, saying what we need, asking for what we need, organizing for what we need. And there will be plenty of opportunity to do that as we turn the corner into the new year.
And if I can suggest one thing to do in the coming weeks, turn those Mondays into Mondays to call your state senator. So or your senator, U.S. senator. We need to get the Senate to do our bidding as soon as possible. Chrissy, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we probably have time for one more question, and it's a really good one from Cassandra again. What things should we be focusing on during this lame duck session before the House shifts to red? Like what initiatives should we be focusing on? I will just say cough, ERA, cough. I'll let the speakers answer. You guys don't want to hear from me.
So I'll start this. Call your senator. Tell your senator to tell Senator Schumer to bring the ERA to the floor for a vote. SJ Res 1. We have a very small window. We don't have control of the House anymore. This is our opportunity to get elected officials on the ballot, on the record for their vote. In doing so, that gives our president extra clearance so that he can say, look, this is supported by the representatives of the American people. And that it gives him more support in taking any future lawsuits, which we know there will be challenges once the ERA is actually put into law. So this gives him a little more coverage to say that this is actually a mandate by the American people. That's my plug from our position.
And I'll follow that up with, I think one of the things that people could do with their senators is, we kind of gave them a little bit of time while they're campaigning here. But one of the things we did is we met with Senator Cortez Masto back when Texas, in the abortion issue, we were, trying to get some attention there. And we told her about a letter that was being signed. She signed on. I mean, she literally called DC while we were on the call with her and found out about it, and then made a video for us that we could put out in support. So, maybe beyond saying support the ERA and bring up a vote, but have your senators find a way to be really visual about it with their, because I think it's easy to say, sure, I support it, but let's see some action.
Okay, I think that's probably all the time we have for questions. If we want to just close out now and say goodbye, Zakia.
Sure. But first, before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our partners in the ERA Coalition, the Feminist Majority, and the Ms. Foundation magazine for the pre-election polling, because to Amanda's point, you gave us hope to show that what we've been hearing, and all the pundits got it wrong because they weren't listening to the women who are actually going out and making these votes happen. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully we at the coalition will find the money to do another poll as we get closer to 2024. So for those of you who are interested in polling, that's how they get done. Someone has to pay for them. So I do want to thank everyone for joining us today. I appreciate all of your time. Thank you for joining the conversation, and a special thank you to our guests, Jerry Burton, co-executive director of the Nevada chapter of the National Organization for Women, Amanda Brown-Learman, the executive director at Supermajority and Supermajority Foundation Education Fund, and Kate Gormley, vice president at Lake Research Partners. Thank you all for your time. I'll look forward to our next town hall, which will be on reproductive rights. We look forward to talking with you again, and hope to keep in good touch. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Whomever is host will have to end the meeting, and just a note that we are still live streaming.
Thank you.
FYI. I'm not sure who's host.
Have a
Thanks,
good
Joel. I hope
Thanksgiving.
everyone